I got a phone call late last year from a close friend, Dari Andrukovic, who I've known for quite a long time. And she kept leaving messages for me and wanted me to call her. And I thought, oh, that's odd, because we usually just email and leave messages for each other. But anyway, when I did speak to her, she said she'd made this discovery and she wanted to tell 4 people in the world about it. And I was one of them, and so I felt very privileged. And she had basically discovered this concerto for violone, for Viennese bass, that had not been played really since its premiere, and it had been misattributed and sitting in a library. She was researching a famous double bass soloist called Johann Matthias Sperger, and he had written 18 concerti, and in amongst those was one that always seemed to her a little bit kind of dubious. And of those 18 concerti, only a couple have ever been published. This one's certainly not. And she thought, she was looking at it, studying the watermarks. She was absolutely meticulous, sort of historical analyst, and discovered that the watermarks weren't consistent with his other things, and the thematic part of the concerto, the theme, seemed to be something that she'd seen before. And she, anyway, through really painstaking analysis and musicological analysis, she realized that this was actually by Pleyel. And so as double bass players playing our classical repertoire, mostly written for this instrument, we have composers that most people have never heard of, like Van Hal and Dinnersdorf and Pichel and Hofmeister and Rosslaub and so forth, and Zimmermann. Not the really famous classical composers that most people are familiar with in concert hall. Pleyel, however, is a different order. He is one of the better known classical composers. So it's quite exciting to find a piece that is by a better known composer. And as she sent me the music, she had produced an edition basically straight away, had it authenticated in Europe by the experts, Pleyel's experts, and so felt comfortable to make this announcement. She promised for me not to say a word until it was actually announced properly, which is coming up fairly soon. But I put it on the stand of one of my students at the conservatorium, just the first page of the theme, and he said, oh, what's this? I said, oh, when you're teaching students, this will be the classical concerto that they all learn, not the ones that you're studying now. And I really believe that's the case. It's absolutely stunning piece of music. So this will be the first performance, if you like, sort of a world premiere. We don't know when and where it was ever performed, presumably because Sperger copied it. It was performed somewhere, but we have no record of any particular performance from that work, and certainly no modern performance, not for the last, or not since the 1750s. So it's very exciting to be part of a sort of a world premiere, or modern premiere, if you like, of a concerto. Well, we don't have a lot of great concertos. We have quite a lot that appeared in a very short space of time because there was suddenly an instrument that could perform concertant parts, so it could be heard over the top of an orchestra. There was suddenly a lot of, well, not suddenly, over a period of sort of 40, 50 years, a really succession of noted soloists on the instrument that people were writing for. The last and greatest of those was Johann Matthias Sperger, and he wrote an enormous amount of music himself, was very famous in his lifetime, and it's really quite something to actually be able to play one of these pieces sort of for the first time. And Paul was ecstatic. I mentioned it to Paul after I'd heard from him. I was sort of excited. I wanted to share it with someone, but I couldn't share much. So I called him and I said, look, there's this new concerto, and I'm not expecting anyway that he'd go, yeah, great, we'll play it, but he was completely excited and said, can we do the premiere? And so I contacted her, and I didn't think this would ever happen, because a lot of times you're discussing things and they either do or they don't happen in the future. But Paul was quite adamant that we could, that if we could, we would do the premiere. So I'm so excited that it's going to be in our season next year.